I was 23 when I joined the Oceanic Seismic Research Initiative, a government-funded program stationed far off the continental shelf, where the seafloor dropped like a curtain into blackness. We weren't there for oil, or fish, or even to map the terrain. Our job was to listen, to monitor low-frequency quakes, to record shifts in the plates, to sit, mostly, in silence while machines did the talking. We lived aboard the Erebus, a refitted survey vessel equipped with a submersible and a remote-operated deep-sea station named Bellwether. Bellwether was more than a tool, it was a sentry buried in the silt 6 miles down, its instruments wired into the ridge like nerves to a spine. If anything stirred, Bellwether would know. My days were filled with signal interpretation and sonar logs, but what truly captivated me was the silence. It's a strange thing, the silence of the deep. It doesn't feel like the absence of noise. It feels like something watching, like the pressure of thousands of atmospheres pressing against your eardrums, and still, you strain to hear a whisper. The oddities began on the 3rd month, a low-frequency vibration uncharacteristic, irregular. Not a tectonic tremor, not a collapse or a slide. It was steady, almost rhythmic, like a beat beneath the sea. I logged it and forwarded the file to headquarters. Their response was quick, impersonal. Instrument error. Reset Bellwether. Recalibrate the data stream. I descended in the submersible 2 days later. Pilot status, green. Conditions, marginal. Visibility, 40 meters. The ocean swallowed us in gradients gray to blue to black. The dive took 3 hours. The lower we went, the more distorted the sonar readings became. Bellwether's beacon pulsed faintly as I approached, its lights flickering like a heartbeat. And then something moved. Not in the distance, not at the edge of the feed. It moved beneath me. The floor itself, a flat expanse of sand and silt, shifted, the way a muscle tightens beneath skin. I hovered, stared, waited for the silt to settle. But what I saw made no sense. The sediment was clearing, revealing something like texture. Not stone, not coral. Something smooth and glistening. A pattern. Dozens of concentric rings etched deep into the ground. Each ring subtly raised. Each glinting like wet glass. Then one opened. Not like a fissure. Not like a crack. It opened like a lid. A circular iris dilating. I froze. My hands hovered over the controls, breath fogging the viewport. And though it's absurd to say, I felt it look at me. Not just observe me, but recognize me. As though it had waited. Bellwether's instruments spiked pressure. Seismic vibration, EM flux. The sensors screamed and then went dead. Lights flickered. The sub's ballast shifted. And suddenly, I was falling. The seafloor, or whatever lay beneath it, opened and swallowed me whole. There was no impact. Just descent. Controlled, smooth, like being lowered into the throat of something immense. The sub's lights adjusted slowly. I wasn't in a trench or a cave. I was inside something, and it was alive. The descent slowed, as if whatever had opened beneath the submersible had changed its mind, unsure whether to consume me or simply observe. I didn't know if I was drifting through water anymore. The density had shifted. It felt thicker, like syrup pressing against the hull. The lights cut through only a few feet before fading into oily shadows. I adjusted the lamps, boosting their intensity, and saw the walls. They weren't made of rock. They were soft, fibrous. They moved with a slow, undulating rhythm, like gills pulsing in low tide. Veins or something like them ran in branching patterns along the curved walls. Some were the width of cables. Others were as thick as tree trunks. All of them pulsed faintly with a blue bioluminescent glow. Not uniform, not decorative. It looked like communication flashes moving in sequences, as if relaying some ancient code. My radio crackled to life. Static, high-pitched, shrill. It wasn't from the surface. This wasn't feedback. It was a sound I'd never heard come from any human channel. It scratched at my ears, a vibration I felt more in my jaw than in my skull. I turned it off, but the pressure didn't stop. Something around me, maybe the very walls, was generating that signal. Not noise, language. I tried to ascend. The thrusters fought sluggishly. No upward movement, no lateral drift. The sub was still suspended but immobile, like it had been clutched. Not mechanically, not magnetically, but biologically. I stared into the darkness ahead. I should have been afraid, and I was, but not in the way I'd always imagined. It wasn't terror, it was reverence. Awe, the way a person must feel standing at the mouth of a cathedral carved into a mountain by no human hand. Then I saw the eye again. Not one, many, scattered across the walls, embedded in the surface like pearls in meat. All of them closed until they weren't. They blinked open slowly, silently. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Each eye unique, some with slitted pupils, others wide and round, some glowing with faint amber light, others dark and reflective. And they were watching me. Not the sub, me. Somehow, they knew where I was inside the capsule. I couldn't move under their gaze. Then the lights in the cabin flickered again, dimmed, and something touched the hull. It wasn't a knock or scrape. It was soft, deliberate, like a fingertip dragging along glass. It moved in slow spirals around the viewing dome. I backed away instinctively, though the dome was nearly 5 inches thick. My breath caught as more shapes began to form outside. Appendages, not tentacles. These were too rigid, segmented, organic, yet jointed. Like the limbs of an insect scaled up beyond reason. They were probing, not attacking. Testing the craft. One limb paused directly in front of the dome and unfurled like a flower, revealing a smaller appendage inside. It hovered, waited, and then it tapped. Just once. The sound echoed inside like a chime, and in that moment, every eye blinked in unison. The lights surged, and I understood without words, without translation. This place wasn't merely alive, it was intelligent. Not a creature, but a consciousness, and I was inside it. The sub's oxygen levels began to drop. The systems didn't register any leak, but the pressure inside was shifting. I felt lightheaded, my fingers tingling. Panic finally overtook wonder. I grabbed the manual override, trying to reroute power from propulsion to emergency ballast. I had to rise. I had to get out. But before I could complete the command, the view outside began to change. The walls receded not physically, but optically. The space around me unfolded like a mirrored chamber, reflecting impossible geometries. Space bent. Depth no longer obeyed the rules I knew. I wasn't just inside something. I was inside somewhere, and it was beginning to show me what it had seen. There are no words to describe what I saw next, not because it was vague or abstract, but because my mind wasn't built to contain it. Imagine watching a memory not your own. Imagine being shown images that did not come from your life, but from the life of something vast, alien, and unspeakably old. I wasn't dreaming, I was remembering. Through it. With it. The space around me shimmered like heat on asphalt. My eyes burned, but I couldn't close them. Every blink revealed new layers, visions etched directly onto the inside of my skull. I saw the ocean in its infancy, not as a blue cradle for life, but as something empty, dark, and primal. A time when the earth still trembled with forming rage, and the sky bled ash. And beneath that chaos, something ancient opened its eyes for the first time. It wasn't born. It simply became. It had no form, just pressure, presence, awareness, and hunger. Not the kind that could be sated with flesh or heat. It craved consciousness, experience. It spread beneath the seabed like mold in darkness, silent and undetected. Not asleep, not dead, just waiting. I watched as its tendrils reached through stone and sediment, coiling gently around hydrothermal vents and ancient volcanic roots. Not consuming them, but listening, absorbing, adapting. With each century, it grew wiser. With each millennia, more deliberate. I saw whales pass over it, their calls like music to its unformed senses. It responded, not in song but in shape, learning their language, not to speak but to observe more clearly. Its body was the seabed. Its eyes were silt and bone. Creatures died and were absorbed into it, not devoured, preserved, stored like books on shelves. Then I saw us, our ships, our machines, our drills, tiny silver dots piercing the skin of a sleeping god. It didn't retaliate. It watched, patient, curious, until something changed, until we went deeper than we should have, until Bellwether. I saw Bellwether through its eyes not as a probe, but as an intruder, a parasite that burrowed too close to its core. And then I saw myself, descending like a blood cell toward the heart of something no microscope could ever understand. It didn't summon me. It recognized me, and it was reaching back. My body felt weightless. I couldn't tell if I was breathing. My skin prickled with cold. A hum vibrated deep in my chest, low, steady, like a second heartbeat waking beneath my own. And then, the light returned. It came from above, a narrow, pale shaft breaking through the warped geometry around me. The vision ended. The walls pulsed once, then receded, and the submersible jerked upward without warning. The limbs that had caressed it withdrew. The pressure equalized. The thrusters engaged on their own. I didn't steer. I didn't question. I simply rose. The journey upward felt longer than it should have. Every second ticked by like a minute. The comms were dead. My ears rang in that strange silence again, and though I was ascending, I felt the weight of something clinging to me, not physically, but mentally, like some piece of it had been left behind in my head. When I broke the surface, the sky was pale with early dawn. The Erebus was still anchored nearby, her lights flickering on the swell. I should have felt relief. I should have cried, laughed, screamed, but I didn't. I just stared at the rising sun, blinking slowly, like I'd forgotten how to be human. They hauled me aboard in silence. No cheers, no scolding, just stares. I didn't need to ask, I could see it on their faces. They'd been watching my telemetry, the dead systems, the blackout, the anomaly. They knew something had gone wrong, but they didn't know where I'd been. Not yet. And I wasn't sure I could tell them, because part of me was still down there, and part of it was up here, now, with me. The debrief was formal, sterile, conducted in a dim compartment below deck, where fluorescent lights buzzed above metal chairs, and the scent of brine clung to everything. They asked questions in calm, measured tones, as if emotion might contaminate the data. I answered with caution, not out of fear, but because I didn't know how to separate what had happened from what I'd felt. Words were blunt tools. What I'd experienced needed instruments of another kind, something that could translate awe, terror, and communion all at once. Describe the malfunction, they said. There was no malfunction, I told them. It brought me down. They exchanged glances, typing notes into sleek tablets, never looking at me for more than a second. I recognized one of them, Dr. Herrera, a geophysicist, rational to the core. She asked what I meant by it. I told her I didn't have a name. I described what I could, the texture of the walls, the eyes, the silence that pulsed with thought. But I left out the memory, the vision. That part wasn't for them. Later, in my bunk, I stared at the ceiling for hours. Every time I blinked, I saw the rings, the concentric lines in the silt where the eye had opened. I couldn't sleep. My skin itched like something had been written into it. I pressed my palm against the metal wall and half expected it to respond, to shimmer and part like before. It didn't. But the feeling didn't fade. The next day, Bellwether's data feed came back online. Except it wasn't just the usual seismic telemetry. The logs contained sequences, pulses of electrical signals that matched no known activity. A pattern. When converted to audio, it produced a low, layered drone, like deep coral windpipes harmonizing underwater. And embedded within it, barely noticeable, was rhythm. Purpose. We'd heard seismic signals before. We'd never heard intention. I volunteered to analyze the patterns, and they let me. Maybe out of curiosity. Maybe because they hoped I'd talk more while doing it. But I said little. I just listened. The more I listened, the more familiar it felt, not because I understood it, but because part of me had already heard it. Down there, in the place without time, it wasn't just sound, it was a message, and I wasn't alone in sensing it. Late one night, I found Dr. Herrera in the lab, sitting perfectly still, her eyes closed, headphones on. She didn't notice me at first. When she did, she looked different, unsettled, but fascinated. I asked what she was hearing. She just said, "There's more beneath us than we thought." Her voice trembled. The next dive wasn't scheduled, but she insisted, said we had to return to the anomaly. Not just for research, but for understanding. Something had changed in her, the same way it had changed me. I recognized it now in the way she moved slower, as if in reverence. The way she paused before speaking, like listening for echoes in silence. I joined her. As we descended together, the water thickened again. The light grew pale, then black, and once more, the sonar failed in that particular precise way. The feed didn't go dead. It bent. The world twisted around us, just like before, but it wasn't identical. The descent felt welcomed. The silt below parted before we reached it. No contact, no resistance. As if the seabed remembered our presence and made space for our return. As if it had prepared. This time, the entry was smoother. No shock. No pressure. Only silence. And then, light. A corridor opened in the silt, flanked by those pulsing walls less like flesh, more like fabric stitched from starlight and bone. I looked at Herrera, and she at me. Neither of us spoke. There was no need. We understood. We had been invited deeper, and we were ready to follow. The corridor was not carved or built. Not in any way we understood construction. It felt grown woven from strands of thought and flesh, as though the structure was both vessel and memory. As our sub drifted forward, not powered but drawn, the walls pulsed with a dim violet light. Patterns moved across them like constellations shifting in slow motion. Every pulse echoed in my chest, a rhythm I could feel but couldn't place a song older than sound. We didn't speak, Herrera and I. We were beyond words. She sat beside me, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her gaze fixed on the darkening passage ahead. I watched her face, watched it change, soften in the presence of something vast. We were no longer researchers, no longer visitors. We were witnesses, or perhaps pilgrims. The sub slowed to a stop in a vast chamber. The lights outside illuminated a space too large for our instruments to measure, as if distance itself had unraveled. The walls curved upward and then vanished into darkness. In the center of the space, embedded in the floor like a seed, was something unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't mechanical, though it had structure. It wasn't organic, though it pulsed with life. It resembled an eye, but more dimensional, like a thought folded into shape. And it was open, watching. We felt its attention before we saw it move. The sub's lights dimmed, not because of power failure, but as if permission had been revoked. Darkness took hold like a tide, but this time, I didn't panic. Neither did she. The silence was not empty. It was full of presence, full of invitation. And then came the voice. Not a sound through speakers, not a vibration in the water. It was inside us, threaded through marrow and memory. It spoke without language, using sensation, emotion, the sudden ache of longing, the cold brush of grief, the weight of loneliness heavier than pressure at any depth. It asked nothing. It told nothing. It simply showed us what it was. We saw Earth before life, not barren, pregnant, not silent, listening. Beneath the crust, not in hell but in waiting, this presence had endured. Not evil, not good, just aware. Just old. So old that time itself had started to lose shape around it. We saw it reach upward, not in aggression, but in hope. Not to dominate, but to witness. It watched the oceans fill, watched cells divide, watched life crawl and fail and crawl again, It remembered the first eyes to open in the deep. It remembered the first song ever sung by a creature into water. And it remembered when silence returned, when voices grew distant, distracted, divided. It remembered us, and then it offered something. The chamber changed. Walls opened. Light flared, but not to blind, only to reveal. Floating before us were fragments, memories, echoes. Not ours, not human. We saw a blue-skinned creature with translucent fins wrap around its young in silence. We saw an ancient being drift alone through trenches, its mind full of poetry no ear had ever heard. We saw entire species bloom and fade, their thoughts preserved, not in DNA, but in whatever this place was. This was no monster. This was an archive, a living one, and it had kept everything. Herrera wept not from fear, but from understanding. Her hand reached for mine. I took it. In that moment, I felt every barrier between us dissolve. We were no longer two people in a submersible. We were threads in a larger fabric, drawn across time and pressure and thought. But just as the awe settled into peace, something changed. A flicker. A ripple through the archive. One of the memory lights dimmed, then another. Herrera noticed it too. Her lips parted. Her eyes widened. The presence turned inward. It was no longer showing. It was warning. Something was coming. Something that did not belong. And it was already close. The dimming began slowly, like shadows moving beneath a lake, distorting the light without touching the source. At first, I thought it was part of the cycle, a natural rhythm of the archive we hadn't yet understood. But then came the trembling not of the submersible, but of the chamber itself, a subtle, low vibration that felt like a heartbeat skipping a beat. The kind of silence that follows after a breath you didn't know you were holding. Herrera's face paled. I saw it in her expression, an understanding that mirrored my own. Something foreign had entered the fold, not part of this memory, not born of this place. The archive was reacting, not out of welcome, out of fear. I didn't think a being so ancient could feel fear, but I was wrong. The memories around us, those floating shards of distant consciousness, began to flicker like dying stars. Some cracked apart, dissolving into wisps. Others recoiled, receding into the walls like frightened animals. The air, or whatever passed for it, grew dense, heavy, like thought thickened to the point of collapse. The presence tried to speak again, but the feeling had changed. Where there had been awe, there was now urgency. Images came faster, more fragmented. Flashes of something rising from the dark, not from the ocean floor, but from a deeper hollow beneath even the reach of this ancient consciousness, a place even it would not look. It wasn't made of matter. It was hunger, shape without form, motion without purpose, a thing without thought, only instinct. And that instinct was consumption, oblivion. It moved not like a predator, but like decay, slow, relentless, patient. Herrera gasped. Her eyes rolled back for a moment, and she clutched her temples. I reached for her, but my fingers passed through her hand, not physically, but mentally. It was as if she'd been disconnected, even within this place. The presence refocused, trying to draw her back. It couldn't. She was already hearing it. Something else. A whisper not from the archive, but from beyond it. A sound that clawed into the soul like hooks made of memory. She opened her mouth, but no voice came. Only silence, stretched taut and brittle. I gripped her arm, shouting her name. No response. Her body was there, but her mind, it was being touched by something wrong. The chamber trembled again. The sub's interior lights flickered, then surged as the walls around us began to warp. The comforting pulsing patterns turned jagged, like nerves misfiring in panic. The archive was pushing us back, trying to eject us like a virus, but not in hostility. In desperation, it wanted to protect us. It had seen this before. The darkness ahead began to coil, not with motion, but with suggestion, like the space around us remembered a shape it never wanted to recall. It was waking something older, something it had buried beneath memory for eons, and that thing was stirring. Herrera jerked violently, eyes wide and glassy. Her voice, hoarse and trembling, broke through. "It's not blind," she whispered. "It's been watching, waiting for a door." "What door?" I asked. She turned her head toward me, but her expression was not her own. Something else looked through her. Something cold and limitless. "Us," she said. "We're the door." Then she collapsed. The sub lurched. System screamed. Pressure alarms flared to life. The walls of the chamber stretched and tore not physically, but within perception. The archive was sacrificing parts of itself to push us out. I grabbed the emergency ascent controls, but they didn't respond. The presence had to lift us again, like before. I begged silently, frantically for it to let us go. It did. With a single, thunderous pulse of light, we were flung upward, as if gravity had reversed. The corridor collapsed behind us. Darkness chased our ascent like a rising tide of oil. I cradled Herrera in my lap, her body trembling in my arms, whispering in a language I didn't know. When we breached the surface, the sky was dark. The stars had never looked colder. The Erebus pulled us in, silent and swift. No words were spoken. No one questioned the blood beneath our fingernails or the 1,000-yard stairs we wore like wounds. We had touched something sacred, and now something profane had touched us back. Herrera didn't speak for 2 days. She remained in the infirmary, eyes half open, lips moving without sound. The ship's medic could find no injury, no trauma, no neural anomaly. Her vitals were normal, but her mind wasn't. She was in 2 places at once here, physically and somewhere else entirely. Somewhere she couldn't return from on her own. I stayed by her side as much as I could, though the others avoided her. I heard them whisper when they thought I wasn't listening. "Delirium," one said. "Oxygen deprivation," said another. But I had seen the truth, felt it. Whatever had touched her didn't need oxygen. It didn't come from water. It came from underneath, beneath thought, beneath memory, beneath everything. The Erebus stayed anchored above the anomaly. Command didn't order us to leave. I think they wanted answers as badly as we did, but no one volunteered for another dive. No one except me. The data from Bellwether had changed again. The seismic pulses had stopped. In their place was a silence that wasn't absence. It was density, like the signal had grown too large, too heavy to transmit. One technician called it a black tone, a frequency so low and compressed it folded in on itself. It shouldn't have been possible, and yet it was there. That night, I returned to the lower deck alone and played the black tone through a filtered audio system. It didn't come through the speakers. It came through the walls, through my bones. I didn't hear it, I felt it. A vibration in the back of my skull, behind my eyes. And in that moment, I saw a shape. Not fully, not even clearly, but enough. It had teeth. Not in a mouth, not in a head. Its body was teeth. A spiral of consumption, endlessly folding in on itself, erasing whatever it touched, not out of cruelty, but out of nature. It didn't hunt. It didn't stalk. It simply waited to be invited. And we had invited it. Through the archive. Through our minds. Through her. Herrera woke screaming that night. Her voice shook the bulkheads. She tore at her skin, shrieking in a voice not entirely her own. The lights flickered in sync with her cries. The walls vibrated. Instruments died one by one. When we sedated her, it took nearly an hour for the hum to stop the low, droning pressure that had filled the ship's frame like a tuning fork made of flesh. When I returned to the lab, the sonar logs had changed. There were no pulses, no signals, no seismic activity, just static. Until it blinked. The floor. The ocean floor. Bellwether's camera had captured a single frame before the feed cut a ring of silt, peeling back, just like before. Only this time, There was no iris, no eye. There was a hole, black, wide, breathing. It hadn't been there before. The coordinates matched our last descent exactly. But now it pulsed at the edge of visibility, not as an entrance, but as a wound. Something had broken free, or been released, and it was rising. I felt it first in my dreams, shadows that bled through my consciousness like ink in water. I'd wake gasping, hands trembling, unable to remember the nightmare itself, only the weight of it, that unbearable gravity. I knew what it wanted. It wasn't just hunger. It wasn't just movement. It wanted mind. It needed vessels. And Herrera, poor brilliant Herrera, had been its first touch point. Now, it wanted more. The others began to feel it too. One technician collapsed in the hallway, blood leaking from his ears. Another locked himself in his cabin and refused to speak. The ship's temperature dropped inexplicably, even as the engines strained. The ocean around us grew still, too still, like the entire sea had stopped breathing. I stared out across the black surface, and I felt it looking back, not from below. From within, it was no longer a question of what it was. It was a question of how long we had left. The ocean didn't move for 2 days. Not a wave, not a breeze, not a gull. It was as if the world had paused to listen to something only it could hear. The water, usually restless even in stillness, had taken on the silence of breath held too long. We weren't floating anymore. We were suspended, held in place by something that extended beyond gravity or tide. Herrera hadn't spoken since her episode. She sat in her bunk, eyes unfocused, lips pressed tight like she was holding something in not words, but pressure. The medic whispered about sedation, even evacuation, but no chopper would come. No message went through. Every transmission ended in static. We were alone, and whatever we disturbed had found us. It didn't attack. It didn't emerge from the deep with teeth and claws and mythic fury. That would have been merciful. What it did instead was seep into thought, into dreams, into the small cracks that made us human. I saw it happen first to Vega, one of the signal analysts. He stood outside the lab for hours, staring at the sea, unblinking. When I finally pulled him away, he didn't resist. He just said, "It remembers me." Those words haunted me. It remembers, because that meant it wasn't just reacting. It was choosing. That night, I went to Herrera again. I sat beside her and waited. The room was dark, lit only by the pulse of a failing monitor. I didn't speak. I knew something was listening, something behind her eyes. And slowly, she turned to me, not all at once, not like a movement, but like a door creaking open. "I saw it," she said, her voice dry as paper. "It showed me what's beneath the archive, what it buried." I waited. "It's not a creature, not like the others. It's not even part of life. It's what comes after, what waits when the last thought is gone. It doesn't speak. It doesn't feel. It only remembers what silence tastes like." She looked at me, really looked, and I felt it again, that sense that something else was watching through her. "It used to be alive," she whispered, "until it consumed itself." I asked her if that was where we were headed. She nodded once. "We've already begun." The next morning, the sea changed. It rolled not in waves, but in convulsions, like a great sheet of skin being twitched by something beneath. The crew scrambled, shouting, running, strapping things down. But I stood still. I knew what it was. It wasn't surfacing. It was shifting. The ocean floor was moving again. This time, we could see it on the live feed Bellwether's camera, still transmitting by some miracle. The silt peeled away like old paint. The concentric rings had widened, split, and spread outward like cracks in glass. From the center rose something massive, but it wasn't rising in defiance or aggression. It was unfolding. It had no bones, no limbs, no recognizable anatomy, just texture. Layers of memory, like skin made of forgotten dreams and broken language. And it pulsed, not as a signal, but as a heartbeat, faint, slow, steady, the rhythm of something waiting to be noticed. We had awakened it, not from slumber, but from restraint. We'd given it a window, and now it had found the mirror. Us! The Erebus began to groan beneath our feet, not from pressure, but from within. Doors refused to open. Lights blinked in patterns. The ship's systems, its very framework, had become part of the signal. Our vessel was no longer a sanctuary. It was a conduit. Herrera walked onto the deck without being seen. I found her only because I followed the cold. The air around her shimmered slightly, like heat haze reversed. She stood at the edge, staring into the black. "I hear them," she said. "All of them. The things it devoured, the thoughts it carries. They sing, but they're not songs. They're questions." "What kind of questions?" I asked. She smiled. "A small, broken thing. They're asking who we are, and why we knocked." Then she jumped. Not violently, not in despair. She stepped off the edge like she was going home. The sea didn't resist. It welcomed her. And then it stared at me. Because now I was the last one who understood. I didn't move for a long time after she fell. Not because I was paralyzed by fear or grief, but because some part of me had expected it. Like I'd known all along, this was how it would end, with one of us answering the call. Not out of compulsion, but out of recognition. She hadn't jumped. She had obeyed. The way you obey a memory that isn't yours but lives inside you anyway. The rest of the crew was gone. Some vanished without a trace. Others left behind locked cabins, radios playing nothing but silence, personal logs filled with phrases in languages they didn't know. One engineer had written the same sentence over and over in thick black pen. "It's not speaking, it's remembering." Over 500 times, he was never found. The Erebus drifted, systems failing one by one, not from damage but disinterest. It was like the ship itself was forgetting what it was, cell by cell. Screens glitched in slow-motion spirals. Lights blinked like they were trying to blink out of existence. I walked the halls alone, listening to the groan of metal and the subtle creak of thought bleeding through steel. Even the air had changed heavier, flavored with something unnameable, like dust scraped from the corners of a mind too old to forget. I tried sending a message topside. The transmitter flared once, then died. Not with static, but with a deep, wet silence, like a breath held underwater. I thought of abandoning ship, taking one of the auxiliary rafts and paddling blind until dehydration or luck chose for me. But something in me knew that wouldn't matter. Geography had stopped applying. We weren't just at sea anymore. We were inside something. Or maybe it was inside us. The ocean below had changed shape again. Not visibly, not in the way water rises or falls, but in how it felt. There was a pressure now, not of depth, but of expectation. As if the thing below was no longer just watching, but waiting. Waiting for me. Because I was the last one left who knew the full shape of what we had seen. I was the last keeper of the memory it had offered, and the only one who hadn't yet surrendered to it. I watched the hole on the sonar screen, still just a shadow, a black bloom pulsing beneath the sea like a heartbeat folded into geometry. The archive had vanished. Bellwether's last images showed it curling inward, walls collapsing as though inhaled. It hadn't been destroyed. It had retreated, shut itself away. The door was closed. But the thing beneath, it hadn't needed a door. It had found us. And through us, it had found the surface. I began dreaming in sequences. Images I couldn't place. Whales singing backwards. Fossils exhaling dust. Cities beneath salt, with streets paved in bone. Sometimes I'd wake with my mouth full of seawater. Other times with tears on my cheeks and no memory of sadness. My reflection in the porthole wasn't wrong. But it wasn't quite mine anymore. My eyes had changed deeper, darker, as though something behind them was learning how to be me. I realized then, it was never about discovery. It was about inheritance. This thing, whatever it was, didn't want to consume the world. It didn't even want to rule it. It just wanted to be remembered. And memory, true memory, needs a vessel. Something soft,